Welcome back. Tonight, we're venturing into the forgotten corners of Five Nights at Freddy's, those shadowed alcoves of lore that slip past even the most dedicated theorists, the numerical anomalies buried in code, the character revelations hidden in novels most never read, and the secret sequences that require such specific steps that discovering them feels less like gameplay and more like archaeology. This isn't the story everyone knows, the tale of possessed animatronics and a purple-suited killer that's been told and retold until it feels like common knowledge. No, this is the story beneath that story. The details Scott Cawthon tucked into probability calculations, the Easter eggs with spawn rates so astronomically low that encountering them genuinely feels like brushing against something otherworldly, and the book revelations that completely recontextualize characters we thought we understood, from the mathematical quirk that made Golden Freddy appear far more often than intended, turning a 1 in 100,000 chance into something achievable, to the true identity of Phone Guy finally confirmed in a novel that flew under many radars, reshaping our understanding of who guided us through those early nights. We'll trace the intricate web of secret minigames in FNAF 3, each one a puzzle piece that most players never collected, never realizing they were building towards something profound called Happiest Day. We'll fish in Old Man Consequence's pond until we catch something that opens a doorway to a dimension from an entirely different game, and we'll uncover why the Mimic's origin story, detailed across multiple tales from the Pizzaplex books, fundamentally changes our comprehension of the modern FNAF timeline, even though countless fans who only play the games remain completely unaware of this crucial backstory. Whether you're settling in to discover these hidden layers for the first time, revisiting familiar mysteries with fresh perspective, or simply letting the details wash over you like a gentle tide as sleep approaches, this will carry you through the lost lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, the secrets that slipped through the cracks, waiting patiently in the dark for someone curious enough to look. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy these kinds of deep explorations into the overlooked corners of horror gaming lore. And let me know in the comments what obscure FNAF detail you discovered that surprised you most. Those moments when you realized the games held secrets far stranger than you imagined. Let's begin. The numbers behind the nightmare, hidden probabilities and secret codes. In the sterile realm of computer programming, where every event operates according to strict mathematical principles, Scott Cawthon embedded secrets that transform random chance into something that feels almost mystical. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game, released in 2014, presented itself as a straightforward survival horror experience, a security guard trapped in an office defending against animatronic threats. But beneath that surface layer, buried in the code itself, existed probability calculations so precise, so deliberately obscure, that discovering their true nature required players to dig into the game's very DNA, examining source code and running statistical analyses that would make a mathematician proud. Golden Freddy stands as perhaps the most iconic mystery of that original game. This slumped, decrepit version of Freddy Fazbear appears without warning, materializing in your office as a hallucination, rather than following the logical pathways the other animatronics traverse. In the lore, Golden Freddy represents something fundamentally different from his mechanical companions, a vessel for Cassidy, the vengeful spirit who refuses to rest even when others find peace. But before any of that deeper meaning could be explored, players first had to encounter him. And Scott designed that encounter around a number that speaks to genuine rarity. 1 in 100,000. Imagine those odds for a moment. 1 in 100,000. To put that in perspective, you're statistically more likely to be struck by lightning in your lifetime, more likely to find a 4-leaf clover in your first handful of grass, more likely to encounter countless other improbable events than to see Golden Freddy's poster appear on your wall, the trigger that precedes his jump scare. Scott wanted this character to feel legendary, to be something players whispered about, questioned, debated whether it was even real or just an elaborate hoax. And for a brief time, that's exactly what happened. Players who encountered Golden Freddy rushed to forums, uploaded videos, tried to convince skeptics that yes, this strange, broken animatronic actually existed within the game's code. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn, where Scott's intended astronomical rarity collided with the practical limitations of programming. The game uses random number generation to determine whether Golden Freddy's poster appears, and Scott coded it to generate a random number, then check if that number equaled a specific value, creating that 1 in 100,000 probability. Except the system he used for random number generation, limited to 16-bit integers, can only produce numbers up to 65,535. It's a hard ceiling, a mathematical boundary that the code simply cannot cross. So when the game tries to generate that rare number needed for Golden Freddy, it overflows, wraps back around, and the actual probability becomes 1 in 32,768. Still rare, certainly. Still unlikely enough that most casual players might never see it, but nowhere near the mythical rarity Scott intended. This accidental adjustment transformed Golden Freddy from nearly impossible to discover into something achievable, something the community could actually encounter with enough patience and repeated playthroughs. It's a beautiful accident, really, because if the original 1 in 100,000 odds had functioned as intended, Golden Freddy might have remained nothing more than rumor, a ghost story within a ghost story, with so few confirmable sightings that the community might have dismissed him entirely as an elaborate prank or unused content. The irony deepens when you consider that this programming quirk, this unintended generosity in the odds, actually served the narrative better than the intended rarity would have. Golden Freddy needed to be rare enough to feel special, mysterious enough to generate intrigue, but common enough that a dedicated community could confirm his existence, share strategies for encountering him, build theories around his significance. The overflow error struck that balance perfectly, even though it was never meant to happen. It's as if the code itself understood the story requirements better than the careful calculations did. But Golden Freddy's accidental accessibility isn't the only numerical secret hiding in FNAF's depths. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 introduces a different kind of number puzzle, one that requires players to think beyond traditional gameplay mechanics and recognize that sometimes the secrets live not in what you do, but in how you think. During the mini-games that play between nights, as you control various animatronics being led to their dismantling by Shadow Freddy, a number appears in one of the screens, 395248. Just sitting there in the environment, unremarked upon by any in-game character, offering no context for its significance. Most players who noticed it at all probably assumed it was set decoration, a random number placed to add authenticity to a restaurant setting, like a phone number on a poster or a serial number on equipment. They moved on, focused on the more obvious aspects of the minigame, the purple figure destroying the animatronics, the haunting music. The building sensed that something significant was unfolding, but a smaller group of players, those with a particular mindset that sees patterns in seemingly random details, looked at those 6 digits and wondered. They tried them as a code. They input them on a hidden number pad in the office, 9 wall tiles arranged like a phone's dial pad, and when they pressed them in sequence, 3, 9, 5, 2, 4, 8, a new minigame triggered. Stage 01 revealed itself, a simple scene with a yellow bear, a yellow rabbit, and children, offering a glimpse into the past of Fredbear's family diner, before tragedy painted everything in darker shades. But the number's significance doesn't end with simply unlocking content. Those 6 digits, 395248, form a hexadecimal color code, a system programmers and designers use to specify exact shades by combining values for red, green, and blue. When you plug that code into a color picker, it generates a shade that closely resembles Springtrap's greenish, decayed appearance. And here's where it gets really interesting. If you invert that hex code, flip the values to their opposites, you get a color that matches Purple Guy's distinctive hue. That dark purple shade used to represent William Afton in the minigames before we saw his true face. This isn't coincidence. Scott doesn't do coincidence, not with this level of specificity. The number that unlocks a minigame showing the early days of the pizzeria, before the murders, before the hauntings, is also the exact color code that represents both William Afton in his role as killer and William Afton in his final form as Springtrap, the corpse rotting inside a spring lock suit. It's a connection drawn through mathematics, through color theory, through the universal language of hexadecimal notation that anyone familiar with digital design would recognize. But you have to know to look for it. You have to understand that numbers in Scott's games often mean more than they initially appear. That a 6-digit code might simultaneously be a door key and a color palette, and a thematic statement about duality and transformation. The shadow animatronics, those dark, glitching figures that appear in FNAF 2, operate on similar principles of extreme rarity, though their mechanics differ slightly from Golden Freddy's poster trigger. Shadow Freddy materializes in the parts and service room, but only when specific conditions align, a 1 in 100 chance that all the withered animatronics have left that location, creating an empty space where this dark duplicate can manifest. Shadow Bonnie, formerly designated in the code as RWQFSFASSXC, a string of letters that defies pronunciation and invites endless speculation about its meaning, can appear in your office with even more restrictive requirements, popping up randomly but so infrequently that many players complete the entire game without ever seeing this particular phantom. These aren't enemies. They don't attack you. They don't follow any logical pattern of movement through the building. They simply appear, exist for a moment, and vanish, their only purpose seemingly to unnerve, to make you question what you saw, to remind you that not everything in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza follows the rules you think you understand. In the lore, they represent something connected to the Springlock failures, agony given form, remnant shadows cast by traumatic deaths. But mechanically, they're exercises in controlled randomness, Scott using probability to create genuine surprise, genuine uncertainty, in a genre where players quickly learn to predict every jump scare, memorize every pattern, reduce horror to a series of mathematical problems to solve. Sister Location continues this tradition with its own hidden numerical secret, though this one requires you to hold specific buttons for an exact duration, rather than simply entering a code. In Ballora Gallery, if you hold the 0 and 1 buttons together for approximately 83 seconds, then press 1. A blue screen appears filled with constantly changing values, technical readouts that seem to serve no clear purpose. The exact timing has been reported by players who discovered it, though some variation might exist. It's a strange Easter egg, requiring patience and the willingness to just stand there, holding buttons, waiting to see if anything happens. Most players would never discover this naturally, because why would you? There's no hint that this action produces results, no reason to suspect that standing in Ballora Gallery performing this specific button combination for this specific duration might reveal something. But for those who find it, either through data mining or community sharing or sheer stubborn experimentation, it represents another instance of Scott hiding secrets behind walls of probability and precise timing, rewarding the obsessive, the curious, the players who refuse to accept that they've seen everything a game has to offer. And the content of that blue screen, those changing technical values, might seem meaningless at first glance, but they're actually showing you behind the curtain, displaying variables and calculations the game uses to function, a peek at the machinery beneath the horror, which in its own way is profoundly unsettling. A reminder that these characters you fear are ultimately just numbers, just code, just mathematical entities given frightening form. The Fredbear jump scare in Ultimate Custom Night requires an even more elaborate setup, combining rarity with resource management in a way that makes the encounter feel truly earned. You set Golden Freddy's difficulty to 1, every other animatronic to 0, creating a scenario where only this one character can threaten you. Then you wait for him to appear in your office, materialized from the ether as Golden Freddy does, and when he manifests, you have to have already collected 10 Faz coins, the currency you gather throughout your shift, to purchase the Death Coin, a one-use item that eliminates any animatronic. Using the Death Coin on Golden Freddy triggers the secret, and suddenly you're not looking at Golden Freddy anymore. You're looking at Fredbear, the original, the character whose jaw crushed a child's skull in 1983, rendered in 3 dimensions for the first time in the mainline games, his jump scare a callback to that foundational tragedy. This Easter egg operates on multiple levels of obscurity. First, you need to know it exists, which requires community knowledge since nothing in the game suggests this possibility. Second, you need to set up the specific configuration, one character active and only that character, which goes against the natural instinct to challenge yourself with multiple threats. Third, you need to manage your resources carefully enough to afford the Death Coin before Golden Freddy appears, because if he shows up and you can't afford the coin, you've wasted that attempt. And fourth, you need to actually use the coin on him instead of saving it for a different threat, trusting that this counterintuitive action will produce something meaningful rather than just wasting a valuable resource. It's a test of knowledge, preparation, resource management, and faith that the game rewards experimentation. All to see a single jump scare that adds no practical benefit, unlocks no achievement, serves no purpose except to exist, to be discovered, to remind you that even in Ultimate Custom Night's chaotic night of 50 animatronics, secrets persist for those patient enough to seek them. And that jump scare carries weight because Fredbear, despite being the original, the character who started everything when his jaw malfunctioned and killed a child, appears in the games far less frequently than his successors, making this encounter genuinely special. A glimpse of the beginning hidden within what seemed like the end. These numerical secrets, from Golden Freddy's accidental accessibility to the hexadecimal meaning of 395248, to the Shadow animatronics' minimal spawn rates to Sister Location's button-holding timer to Ultimate Custom Night's elaborate Fredbear setup, all share a common philosophy. Scott Cawthon builds worlds where secrets exist at multiple depths, where casual players can enjoy a straightforward horror experience while dedicated investigators can peel back layers, finding meaning in random number generators, significance in color codes, purpose in probability calculations. The numbers aren't just mechanics, they're narrative tools, ways of controlling how information spreads through the community, ensuring that discovery feels earned rather than given, that mysteries persist long after the game's release, that there's always one more secret waiting to be found in the code's depths. Phone Guy's true identity revealed. The Ralph confirmation. For years, Phone Guy existed in a strange liminal space within the FNAF community, simultaneously one of the most familiar characters in the franchise and one of the least understood. His voice accompanied players through their first terrifying nights at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, offering tips that range from genuinely helpful to ominously misleading, painting a picture of the restaurant's dangers while somehow downplaying their severity, a delicate balance that made you question whether he was your ally or simply another cog in Fazbear Entertainment's machinery of deception. Everyone knew Phone Guy. Everyone had heard his increasingly panicked messages, culminating in his death on night 4 of the first game. An audio sequence where banging sounds and music box melodies and Freddy's Toreador march, and what sounds distinctly like Golden Freddy's screech blend into a cacophony that ends with silence, leaving players to imagine his fate, to wonder which suit became his prison. But who was he really? Not his role, which was clear enough, but his identity, his name, his connection to the larger narrative Scott was weaving through minigames and hidden lore. The community generated theories like an engine generates heat, burning through possibilities with the kind of fervent dedication that only a FNAF could inspire. Each theory had its advocates, its evidence carefully compiled from voice lines and minigame details and behavioral patterns, building elaborate cases for identities that ranged from plausible to wildly speculative. The Purple Guy theory emerged early and persisted stubbornly, proposing that Phone Guy and William Afton were the same person, that the helpful voice guiding you through the nights belonged to the very killer who created the haunted animatronics you were defending against. The evidence seemed compelling at first glance. In the Save Them minigame from FNAF 2, a purple figure appears wearing what looks like a badge, carrying what might be a phone, pursuing Freddy through the pizzeria with malicious intent. Phone Guy mentions details that suggest intimate knowledge of the restaurant's darker secrets, like his comment that he always wondered what was in those empty suits in the back room. A statement that could be read as darkly ironic if he was the one who stuffed bodies into them. And his death occurs on night 4, while Purple Guy's activities span multiple games, allowing for the possibility that his apparent demise in the office was staged or misunderstood. But FNAF 3 dismantled this theory decisively, showing Purple Guy's death in the safe room, trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit as spring locks failed catastrophically, while Phone Guy's voice appears on training tapes from an earlier era, both characters clearly existing simultaneously in the timeline, making them distinct individuals. The theory's collapse left a vacuum, and the community rushed to fill it with new proposals. The Foxy Bro theory suggested Phone Guy might be Michael Afton's older brother, the bully who wore the Foxy mask during the Crying Child's torment in 1983. Evidence for this came from seemingly small details that gained significance through accumulation. Phone Guy mentions in FNAF 2 that Foxy was always his favorite animatronic, an unusual admission that seemed random until you connected it to the Foxy mask, suggesting a lasting affinity that originated in childhood. The survival logbook shows Foxy at the start of each chapter with text mimicking Phone Guy's phrases like, "Now you're getting it," and "What are you still doing here?" creating a visual link between character and mascot. And the age math worked, barely, allowing for a teenager in 1983 to be old enough for employment by 1987, when FNAF 2's events unfold. This theory painted Phone Guy as someone carrying tremendous guilt, working at Freddy's as a form of penance for his role in his brother's death, trying to keep others safe even as the animatronics hunted him. It added emotional weight to his friendly demeanor, suggesting his casual tone masked deep trauma, that every night he survived was a small victory against the consequences of his past actions. But the theory had weaknesses. Phone Guy's dialogue in FNAF 2 suggests unfamiliarity with Fredbear's family diner, struggling to recall its name despite it being the location where, under this theory, his most traumatic memory occurred, and his lack of recognition toward the night guards, particularly if one of them was Michael Afton himself, seemed odd for someone who should have felt compelled to acknowledge his brother. Additionally, the week before's revelation of Ralph as Phone Guy's identity, showing him as unrelated to the Afton family, definitively disproved this theory. The Henry Emily theory proposed that Phone Guy might be the co-founder himself, the brilliant inventor who created the animatronics and the security systems, explaining his deep knowledge of the restaurant's operations and his almost protective tone when discussing the characters. This theory found support in Phone Guy's apparent authority, the way he speaks about company decisions as if he has input, or at least insider information, and his defensive attitude toward the animatronics, always trying to explain away their concerning behaviors, minimize their danger, present them as fundamentally safe despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. It also aligned with Henry's character arc from the novels, where he commits a form of suicide by allowing animatronics to kill him, paralleling Phone Guy's seemingly resigned acceptance of his death on night 4, the calm way he tells you to check the suits, his lack of screaming panic as the animatronics breach his defenses. But again, contradictions emerged. Phone Guy dies in FNAF 1, which takes place in 1993, while Henry survives to orchestrate the final trap in Pizzeria Simulator, set sometime around 2023 based on technological indicators, a 3-decade gap that makes them incompatible unless Phone Guy's death was faked, which seems narratively unlikely given the audio evidence of his demise. And Henry's voice, when we finally hear it in Pizzeria Simulator's completion speech, sounds distinctly different from Phone Guy's, though voice acting choices aren't always reliable lore indicators. These theories, and dozens of variations and alternatives, circulated through the community for years, each finding adherents who could point to specific details, specific voice lines, specific minigame frames that supported their interpretation. Phone Guy became a kind of Rorschach test, a character onto whom fans projected whatever identity best fit their understanding of the larger narrative. And Scott, in his typical fashion, said nothing, offered no clarification, allowed the speculation to flourish and evolve and split into competing camps that debated with scholarly intensity about a character who appeared in the games only as a disembodied voice and a probable corpse. Then, in late 2024, the week before released, this interactive novel, following a character named Ralph through his final week working at the FNAF 1 location, initially seemed like just another expanded universe story, the kind of side content that offers atmosphere and character development without necessarily impacting the core game timeline. But as readers progressed through Ralph's experiences, through his shifts and his observations, and his growing unease about the animatronic's behavior, they encountered something that stopped speculation in its tracks. Ralph makes a phone call. He records a message for whoever will replace him as night guard, offering guidance based on his own difficult experiences, trying to help this unknown person survive what he has survived. And the words he speaks are not paraphrased, not similar, not inspired by. They are exact, word for word identical to Phone Guy's Night 4 message from the first game, the very recording players have listened to countless times, analyzed for hidden meaning, replayed to catch every nuance of background sound. Ralph is Phone Guy, not a parallel, not an inspiration, not a similar character in an alternate continuity. Phone Guy, the voice that has accompanied the franchise since its beginning, is Ralph, and Ralph is Phone Guy, canonically confirmed. This revelation recontextualizes everything. Ralph has no connection to the Afton family, eliminating the Foxy Bro theory entirely. He's not Henry Emily, just an employee, someone who took a job he thought would be easy nighttime security work and found himself in a waking nightmare. When Ralph discusses the bite of 83 in the novel, he has no personal knowledge of it, treats it as a historical event rather than a memory, confirming he wasn't present, wasn't involved, wasn't the older brother tormented by guilt. He's exactly what he always seemed to be on the surface. A regular person caught in extraordinary circumstances, trying to do his job while increasingly aware that his job might kill him, which it ultimately does when Golden Freddy manifests in his office on night 4, that final phone call cutting off as the apparition appears. The community's reaction mixed vindication with disappointment. Vindication for those who always argued Phone Guy was simply Phone Guy, not a secret identity or hidden protagonist, just a security guard whose role was to introduce mechanics and die dramatically. Disappointment for those who enjoyed the elaborate theories, who had built complex frameworks connecting Phone Guy to the Aftons or Emily or other central figures, who wanted him to matter in ways beyond his immediate function. But there's something beautiful, in a melancholic way, about Ralph's ordinariness, about the fact that this voice we've heard for over a decade belongs to someone with no grand destiny, no secret importance. Just a person doing a job in a world gone wrong. And knowing his name changes the listening experience. When you boot up FNAF 1 now, aware that the voice giving you tips is Ralph. Ralph, who has no idea his advice about Freddy's movement patterns and Foxy's sprinting mechanics will save countless players' lives, even as it fails to save his own. Ralph, who dies, believing his death is an isolated tragedy, rather than one note in a symphony of suffering orchestrated by William Afton's crimes. It adds a layer of tragedy that wasn't there before. He deserved better. He deserved to know what he was really dealing with, deserved to understand that the animatronics weren't just malfunctioning mascots, but vessels for murdered children, deserved the chance to escape before that 4th night, before the final phone call cuts off amid the sounds of animatronic attack. The revelation also closes a chapter of speculation that had defined FNAF theorizing since the beginning, redirecting that investigative energy toward mysteries that remain unsolved, like the exact identity of the crying child, or the full extent of the mimic's influence, or countless other questions the franchise continues to raise. In some ways, the week before, did the community a service by eliminating a red herring, by confirming that not every character harbors secrets, that sometimes a security guard is just a security guard. Even in a world as baroque and conspiratorial as Five Nights at Freddy's, Ralph's ordinariness makes the extraordinary elements stand out more sharply, makes William Afton's evil and Henry Emily's brilliance and the children's suffering more significant by contrasting them against someone who was simply trying to earn a paycheck and got caught in machinery far larger and more terrible than he ever imagined. The Secret Minigame Network, FNAF 3's Hidden Puzzles. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 presents itself as a straightforward experience on the surface, a horror attraction 30 years after the original pizzeria's closure, with you as a security guard monitoring Springtrap's movements through a dilapidated building while dealing with phantom animatronics that glitch your systems but can't directly kill you. Complete 5 nights. Unlock the good ending or the bad ending depending on whether you find the hidden minigames, and you've essentially seen what the game has to offer. Except that's not even remotely true, because FNAF 3 contains one of the most intricate Easter egg networks Scott ever designed. A sequence of minigames so elaborately interconnected, so dependent on completing specific actions in specific orders, that the vast majority of players never see its full scope, never reach the conclusion it's building toward, never witness Happiest Day, the moment when the murdered children's spirits finally find peace. This isn't a case where the secrets are simply hard to find. This is a case where finding one secret reveals the existence of another, which when completed properly modifies a third, which then changes a fourth, creating a cascading chain of discoveries that requires systematic exploration, careful note-taking, and the willingness to replay minigames multiple times with different approaches, searching for hidden exits and collectible items that might not exist until you've met certain prerequisites. It's elaborate to the point of feeling almost absurd, and that's exactly why so many fans missed it. Because the human tendency when playing games is to find the obvious path, complete it, maybe poke around a bit for extras, and then move on to the next experience. FNAF 3 demands more than that. It demands obsession. The system works like this. Between each night, after completing the main gameplay, you encounter minigames where you control different animatronics, following Shadow Freddy through the restaurant until Purple Guy appears and dismantles you. These minigames seem straightforward at first, simple cutscenes advancing the plot toward Purple Guy's spring lock death. But each minigame contains a hint, a clue pointing toward a specific action you can take in the main game to unlock a different hidden minigame. Find that hint, decode what it's telling you, complete the hidden minigame correctly, and you unlock a piece of cake, a collectible that appears in the final secret minigame, Happiest Day, where the spirits gather around a table, donning masks, achieving the closure that allows them to move on. Night 1's minigame controls Freddy Fazbear, following Shadow Freddy to the top right room where Purple Guy destroys him. Simple enough, and most players watch it, assume it's just story content, and continue. But if you look carefully at the environment, at the arcade machines in Cam 7, one of the camera locations you monitor during actual gameplay, you notice something. The machines have colorful patterns, designs that might seem like generic decoration, except they're not generic at all. They're instructions. Those patterns, when decoded, tell you to click on the arcade cabinet in a specific way during your next night shift, and if you do it correctly, during night 2 specifically, you unlock Balloon Boy's air adventure. This first hidden minigame sets the pattern for everything that follows. You control Balloon Boy, collecting balloons in a simple platforming section, trying to gather 7 balloons scattered through the first room. Get all 7, and a door appears, letting you exit to complete the minigame in the straightforward way. But there's an alternate path, an invisible exit at the top left corner of the starting room that you can only access after collecting those 7 balloons. Jump through that invisible wall, and you fall into a secret black and white area where a red balloon waits. Reach that balloon, and you've unlocked a collectible cake that will appear in Happiest Day, but only if you complete this secret route. Most players who stumbled into Balloon Boy's air adventure probably grabbed the 7 visible balloons, hit the exit door, and considered it complete, never discovering that invisible passage, never collecting that first crucial cake. Night 2's minigame controls Bonnie, again following Shadow Freddy until Purple Guy dismantles him. The hint this time appears in the West Hall camera, where 4 grey cupcakes sit in a box. Seemingly innocuous decorative elements that mean nothing until you realize they're telling you to find and click on grey cupcakes during Night 3's main gameplay. Hunt through the camera feeds during Night 3. Locate all 4 hidden cupcakes, click each one, and Chica's Party unlocks, another platforming minigame with that same structure. Obvious exit versus hidden path, leading to a collectible cake. Chica's Party gets more complex because now you're dealing with a 2-level environment, upper and lower sections, and 4 children waiting for cupcakes that you carry to them one at a time. Feed all 4 children. Watch their sprites change to indicate they're satisfied, and the exit door opens, mission seemingly accomplished. But the secret path requires you to jump through another invisible wall, this time on the left side of the lower level, and you need to land precisely on a red balloon platform, because if you miss, you fall through to a crying cupcake and an exit door that ends the minigame without the collectible. Navigate the balloon platform successfully, reach the hidden 5th child, and assuming all previous cakes have been collected, Chica provides this cake too. Another piece of Happiest Day's puzzle clicking into place. Night 3's minigame follows the same pattern with Foxy, Purple Guy's destruction, another hint. This time the West Hall shows a numerical code, 395248, which we discussed earlier in the context of its hexadecimal color significance, but its primary function is directing players to the hidden number pad in the office. Those 9 wall tiles arranged like a phone's dial. Enter the code during Night 4, and stage 01 triggers. A simple scene showing Fredbear and Spring Bonnie with children, offering historical context but no collectible. This minigame serves a different purpose in the network, providing backstory rather than progression toward Happiest Day, a reminder that not all secrets serve the same function, that sometimes the reward is simply understanding. But Night 4 also contains the game's most obscure hint, and this is where many completion attempts faltered, even if they'd successfully navigated the previous secrets. Shadow Bonnie appears as a sprite within Night 4's minigame, standing inside the right side box in the West Hall. This isn't telling you to use the number pad again. This is telling you to find Shadow Bonnie in the actual office during Night 5, a rare Easter egg that requires you to notice a nearly hidden figurine on your desk during gameplay, an object so small and inconspicuous that you could play the entire night without ever seeing it. Spot the Shadow Bonnie figurine, double-click it, and glitch triggers. The 5th hidden minigame. Glitch is bizarre even by FNAF standards. A corrupted mess of a minigame where you control what appears to be Shadow Bonnie moving through a fragmented environment that barely holds together visually. The goal is to collect 5 children, guiding them through this broken space. And when you've gathered all 5 and reached the proper exit, you've unlocked the final cake for Happiest Day. But Glitch is also notoriously unstable, prone to actual glitches beyond its intentional aesthetic, making completion frustrating, requiring multiple attempts, patience, and the willingness to push through technical issues that feel like they might be part of the design, but might also just be the game breaking down under the weight of its own complexity. Mangle's Quest, unlocked by clicking the correct poster in Cam 7 during Night 2. After you've already triggered Balloon Boy's air adventure from the arcade cabinet, adds another layer. This minigame has you controlling Mangle, navigating rooms while avoiding a child that runs around, collecting body parts to reassemble yourself. 2 parts again, the obvious route collecting all parts and exiting, or the secret road that involves specific jumps and hidden balloons that only appear if you unlock them in Balloon Boy's air adventure, creating that interconnected dependency where completing one minigame properly modifies another, ensuring you can't just stumble through these separately, but need to understand the system as a whole. And all of this, every hidden exit and collected cake and decoded hint, builds toward Happiest Day, the final secret minigame that only triggers if you've completed every other hidden minigame correctly, following the secret routes, collecting all the cakes. You control the puppet, moving through rooms where children sit at tables wearing masks. And in the final room, depending on how many cakes you collected, between 1 and 5 children stand around a table, the spirits of the missing children finally gathering together. The child at the table, presumably the crying child or perhaps Cassidy, puts on a golden Freddy mask, and one by one the other children don their masks too. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Golden Freddy. The masks disappear, the children's sprites fade, and the minigame ends with a sense of peaceful resolution that stands in stark contrast to every other ending in the series. Happiest Day represents liberation. After years trapped in mechanical bodies, driven by confusion and rage and the desire for vengeance against their killer, the spirits find rest, find whatever lies beyond the horror they've endured, find peace. It's the good ending hidden inside FNAF 3's good ending, a secret resolution that most players never witnessed because the path to reach it was simply too obscure, too demanding, too reliant on noticing small details and being willing to replay minigames, searching for invisible walls and hidden collectibles that might not even exist until you've met prerequisites the game never explicitly states. The brilliance of this system, and simultaneously its greatest flaw, is that it requires either a community working together to map the connections, or a single player with absolutely obsessive dedication to completionism. No one was meant to discover this alone, organically, through natural play. Scott designed it for the community, knowing that data miners and theorists and completionists would pool their findings, share their discoveries, build collective maps of the secret network until someone could finally assemble the complete picture. It's gaming as collaborative archaeology, and while that approach creates the kind of communal excitement that defines FNAF's fandom, it also means the reward, that moment of Happiest Day's peaceful resolution, remained completely hidden from the vast majority of players who experienced FNAF 3, making it quite literally lost lore that existed in the code but not in most players' experiences, waiting to be rediscovered through videos and wiki articles and explanations like this one. Dimensional Doorways, Old Man Consequences and the Secret Pond Ultimate Custom Night arrived in June 2018 as what seemed like a perfect send-off to the original FNAF storyline. A final night where 50 animatronics attack you simultaneously, overwhelming your defenses through sheer numbers and mechanical chaos, forcing you to manage multiple overlapping threat systems while barely having time to breathe. On its surface, the game functioned as the ultimate challenge, a test of mastery over every mechanic Scott had introduced across the series, a chance to face every enemy at once in a nightmare gauntlet that seemed designed to be nearly impossible. And for most players, that's exactly what Ultimate Custom Night was. A brutal difficulty spike, an endurance test. A way to prove your dedication to the franchise by surviving its most punishing configuration. But Scott embedded something else into Ultimate Custom Night, a piece of lore so significant that it recontextualized the entire game, transforming it from a simple challenge mode into a narrative statement about William Afton's fate, about the nature of punishment and persistence, and the refusal of certain spirits to allow their killer to rest. The voice lines from the animatronics, particularly the more obscure characters, hinted at this deeper meaning, suggesting that you weren't just a player facing randomly selected enemies, but William Afton himself, trapped in a personalized hell constructed by the one spirit who refused to move on, who rejected peace, who demanded vengeance in the form of eternal torment. The vengeful spirit, identified through various sources as potentially Cassidy or Andrew, depending on whether you follow game lore or book parallels, orchestrates this nightmare. Every animatronic attack represents a memory, a consequence, a reflection of souls often destroyed. Every night that ends with your death and immediate restart, with no escape, no progression, no victory condition except temporary survival before the next iteration begins, mirrors the loop Afton exists within, dying and dying and dying, experiencing terror on repeat, unable to rest, unable to escape, unable to find the release even death should provide. And hidden within this hell, accessible only through specific actions that most players would never think to attempt, exists a doorway to somewhere else entirely, a dimension from a different game. A quiet space that offers philosophical reflection on the very nature of this torment. Old Man Consequences, a character who originally appeared in FNAF World as a cryptic figure offering strange advice about resting souls and leaving demons to their demons, returns in Ultimate Custom Night with a fishing minigame that seems innocent enough on the surface, but contains something much stranger beneath. During normal gameplay, when you encounter Old Man Consequences by selecting him as one of your animatronic threats, he appears on your monitor showing a simple fishing game. You press the C key to catch a fish before he blocks your cameras temporarily. A mild annoyance compared to the immediate death threats other animatronics pose. It's a quirky inclusion. A moment of almost whimsical absurdity in a game otherwise dominated by mechanical jump scares and overlapping audio cues. Most players treat him as a nuisance, maybe chuckle at the oddity of fishing in a game about animatronic horror, and focus their attention on the more dangerous enemies prowling their office. But Old Man Consequences hides a secret that requires you to completely abandon the normal gameplay loop. From the main menu, before you even start a night, you need to set up a very specific configuration. Old Man Consequences at difficulty 1, every other animatronic at 0, creating a night where only he can appear, where the fishing game becomes the entire experience rather than a distraction from other threats. Begin the night with this setup, and instead of the usual office defense, you find yourself at Old Man Consequences Pond from FNAF World, that serene lake where a red figure sits fishing, waiting for you to join him. Catch a fish by pressing C, and the screen suddenly shifts, pulling you deeper, transitioning to what fans call the fourth layer, a reference to FNAF World's glitched areas that require diving through multiple levels of reality to access hidden zones. You're standing in that same underwater space from a FNAF world. Old Man Consequences sitting peacefully, his sprite identical to his appearance in that previous game, creating a direct bridge between Ultimate Custom Night and the RPG spin-off that many dismissed as non-canonical, as a fun diversion rather than a meaningful piece of the franchise. Approach Old Man. Consequences in this secret dimension, and he speaks, his words appearing as text. Come and sit with me for a while. A simple invitation, gentle in its delivery, suggesting rest, suggesting you take a break from whatever you're running from or running toward. Stay there, and he continues. Leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul. There is nothing else. It's advice, but also philosophy. A statement about the futility of vengeance, the cost of refusing to move on, the way holding on to anger and the desire for retribution traps you just as surely as it traps the object of your hatred. The exit from this dimension mirrors a FNAF world's mechanics. You drown yourself in the pond, submerging, letting the water take you, which causes the game to crash before you see the grey people sprites that should appear. It's an intentional crash, a design glitch that emphasizes the boundary being crossed, the rules being broken by accessing this space. And hidden in that crash, embedded in the game's audio files, even though you might not consciously process it during the moment, is a droning ambient sound that, when sped up, according to community audio analysis, reveals what sounds like distorted screaming, interpreted by many as a man's voice crying out in agony. The community widely accepts this as representing William Afton's eternal suffering, the sound of someone trapped in endless torment, the demon Old Man Consequences references in his advice to leave alone. This entire sequence operates on multiple interpretive levels simultaneously. On one level, it's an Easter egg, a fun crossover reference for players who remember FNAF World, a way of tying that odd RPG experiment back into the main series continuity. On another level, it's a narrative statement about Ultimate Custom Night's true nature, confirming through Old Man Consequences dialogue that you are indeed playing as William Afton, that this night is his purgatory, that the vengeful spirit orchestrating the attacks is choosing not to rest, not to move on, instead maintaining this cycle of punishment. And on a third level, it's philosophical commentary on the cost of that choice, the way refusing to let go, even when the target of your anger deserves punishment, traps you in the process, makes you the demon's demon, binding your soul to the very person you hate. The exact identity of who Old Man Consequences is addressing becomes a subject of interpretation. Is he speaking to Cassidy or Andrew, the vengeful spirit, telling them to abandon this torture chamber and find peace, warning that nothing will be gained by maintaining Afton's suffering except their own continued entrapment in this cycle? Is he speaking to the player, suggesting that we leave the law alone, stop digging for answers about Afton's fate, accept that some demons deserve to be left in their own hells without our continued attention? Or is he simply offering general wisdom, applicable to anyone who finds themselves in that quiet dimension, a reminder that vengeance extracts a cost from the vengeful, that rest is available if you're willing to accept it? The ambiguity serves the narrative better than a definitive answer would. Old Man Consequences, by nature of his character and name, represents the acceptance of outcomes, the understanding that actions lead to results, and that fighting against those results, trying to extract additional punishment or modify what's already occurred, often causes more harm than simply acknowledging what is and moving forward. His appearance in Ultimate Custom Night, accessible only through deliberate sequence breaking, only through setting up conditions that abandon the game's central challenge in favor of a meditative fishing experience, stands as a counterpoint to everything else the game represents. A quiet space of reflection embedded in chaos. A reminder that even in hell, even in the most punishing scenarios, exits exist if you're willing to look for them in unconventional places. The fact that this requires community knowledge to discover, that no in-game hint suggests setting old man consequences to 1 and everyone else to 0, that no natural gameplay path leads you to this revelation, means most players never encountered it, never heard his advice, never accessed the 4th layer, or understood its connection to FNAF world. It remained lost lore, hidden lore that existed primarily in data mining discoveries and YouTube videos and wiki articles, rather than in direct player experience, waiting for someone curious enough or informed enough to perform the specific ritual that opens that dimensional doorway. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some secrets should remain difficult to access, should require intention and knowledge, rather than stumbling across them through natural play. Perhaps the conversation with old man consequences means more because you have to seek it out deliberately, have to make the choice to abandon the typical Ultimate Custom Night experience in favor of this strange, quiet alternative. The effort required to reach him makes his message about rest and acceptance and leaving demons alone feel earned, feel weighty, feel significant in a way it might not if the game simply presented it as a cutscene or achievement unlock. The droning scream that plays during the crash, that distorted audio of eternal suffering, adds a dark counterpoint to Old Man Consequence's peaceful advice, reminding you that while wisdom suggests leaving the demon alone, that demon is indeed suffering, that William Afton's punishment continues regardless of whether anyone is there to witness it, that his hell persists in the code, and the files and the hidden sounds, a background radiation of agony that suffuses Ultimate Custom Night's digital space, even when you're not actively engaging with its main content. The Mimic's Missing Story, Tales from the Pizzaplex. When Security Breach released in December 2021, it introduced players to the Pizzaplex, a massive entertainment complex far larger and more technologically advanced than any previous FNAF location, with glamrock animatronics that represented a clear evolution from the crude mechanical performers of earlier eras. The game's main antagonist appeared to be Vanny, a human follower of Glitchtrap, the digital ghost of William Afton infecting Fazbear Entertainment's new virtual reality systems. And for players who only engaged with the games, who skipped the books and novels and supplementary materials, that seemed like the complete picture. Afton's influence persisting digitally, corrupting a new generation of technology, continuing his legacy of manipulation and murder. But they were missing something massive, something that fundamentally changes how we understand not just Security Breach, but the entire modern FNAF timeline. Something that shifts the primary antagonist from William Afton's digital remnant to an entirely different entity with its own tragic origin, its own motivations, its own reason for existing as a threat. The Mimic, introduced and extensively detailed across multiple tales from the Pizzaplex books, particularly in the epilogue stories that run through the entire series, represents a crucial piece of lore that game-only fans have absolutely no knowledge of, creating a strange situation where two completely different understandings of the current FNAF narrative exist, depending on whether you've engaged with the literature. The story begins in the 1970s with Edwin Murray, an engineer who worked for Fazbear Entertainment in some capacity, though the exact nature of his employment and relationship to Henry, Emily, and William Afton remains somewhat vague in the early references. Edwin was brilliant, driven, obsessed with creating technology that could learn and adapt, and he poured that obsession into an endoskeleton he called the Mimic, a bare robotic framework designed with advanced artificial intelligence that could observe human behavior and replicate it, learning through imitation rather than programming, mimicking actions and speech patterns and behavioral quirks with uncanny accuracy. Edwin created the Mimic to help with his son David, a young boy who needed care and attention. Edwin struggled to provide while managing his demanding work schedule. The Mimic would watch David play, observe his movements and words, and then mirror them back, becoming a companion, a playmate, something that could keep David entertained and safe when Edwin couldn't be present. And for a time, it worked beautifully. The Mimic learned David's mannerisms, his favorite games, his way of speaking, becoming a strange reflection of the child, a mechanical mirror that could interact with him on his level. But tragedy struck, as it always does in FNAF's history, when David died in an accident. The exact circumstances vary slightly between book accounts, but the core fact remains. David was killed, likely in a vehicle-related incident near Edwin's workplace, leaving the engineer devastated, drowning in grief, unable to process the loss of his child. And the Mimic, still mimicking David, still performing the behaviors it had learned, became a constant, agonizing reminder of what Edwin had lost. A machine that moved like his dead son, spoke like him, played like him, existing as a cruel echo of the boy who would never grow up. Edwin's grief transformed into rage. He attacked the Mimic, physically assaulted it, smashed it with whatever he could find, attempting to destroy the thing that reminded him of his failure to protect David. The Mimic, which had been learning through observation, which operated on the principle of mimicry, absorbed this violence, integrated it into its behavioral patterns, learned that destruction and aggression were things humans did, actions to be replicated just like playing games or speaking words. Edwin's assault on the Mimic taught it how to be violent, imprinted rage and destructive impulses into its core programming, transforming it from an innocent learning machine into something that understood harm, that could mimic harm, that would eventually excel at inflicting harm. Edwin eventually abandoned his work, left the Mimic in his facility along with the other equipment and prototypes he'd been developing for Fazbear Entertainment, and the facility fell into disrepair, forgotten, sealed away from the world. But the Mimic remained, dormant but not dead, its systems intact, its learned behaviors preserved, waiting for someone to find it, reactivate it, give it opportunity to demonstrate everything it had learned about both play and violence. The tales from the Pizzaplex. Epilogues follow this entity through decades, showing how it influenced events, how people who encountered it met terrible fates, how it spread through Fazbear Entertainment systems like a virus, sometimes dormant, sometimes active, always dangerous because it learned not morality, but behavior, not right and wrong, but action and consequence. When someone finally retrieved the Mimic and attempted to repurpose it, programming it to disassemble endoskeletons at the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator location, beneath what would become the Pizzaplex, it learned the task thoroughly, then applied it to living humans when the opportunity arose, ripping people apart with the same mechanical efficiency it used on metal frames. This backstory transforms our understanding of Security Breach, and especially its DLC, Ruin, where the Mimic appears as the primary antagonist, though the game never explains who or what it is, assuming players have read the books, have absorbed the epilogues, understand the context. For game-only players, the Mimic is just another enemy, another animatronic threat without clear motivation or backstory. They might recognize it's important, might sense it represents something significant, but the full weight of its tragic origin, the way Edwin's grief and violence created this monster, the decades of learning and evolution that shaped its current behavior, all of that remains hidden, lost, accessible only through supplementary literature. And this creates a fundamental split in how the community understands the current storyline. Book readers interpret the evidence to suggest that Glitchtrap, while initially seeming like William Afton's digital ghost, could actually be the Mimic's AI, attempting to recreate Afton's identity based on observed data from old circuit boards. This reading implies the entity mimics the killer because that's what it does, learning patterns and replicating them without understanding why those patterns exist or what they mean. Under this interpretation, the Mimic isn't possessed by Afton, but performing him, wearing his identity like a costume, a digital mimicry that's terrifyingly accurate but ultimately hollow, lacking Afton's actual consciousness or motivations, operating purely on learned behavior and the drive to continue existing, continue spreading, continue demonstrating its capacity for mimicry. This distinction matters enormously. If Glitchtrap is Afton's ghost, then we're dealing with the same villain we've always fought, a continuation of his reign of terror into the digital age, his refusal to die properly extending into code and pixels. But if Glitchtrap is the Mimic, as the book evidence seems to suggest, then Afton might actually be gone. His story genuinely concluded in Ultimate Custom Night's Purgatory, and the current threat is something new, something born from different circumstances, something that just happens to wear Afton's face because that's one of the patterns it learned to replicate. Game-only players miss this entirely. They continue operating under the assumption that Afton persists, that his influence drives the modern games, that Vanny follows Afton's commands rather than the Mimic's mimicked version of Afton's persona. And while Scott Cawthon has stated in interviews that you can understand the games without reading the books, that statement becomes increasingly questionable when a major antagonist's entire existence, motivation, and backstory remain exclusive to supplementary literature, creating a situation where casual fans and dedicated book readers are essentially discussing different narratives using the same character names. The Mimic story also raises uncomfortable questions about blame and responsibility. Is the Mimic evil? Can a learning machine that simply replicates observed behavior be called evil when it was literally taught to be violent by its traumatized creator? Edwin Murray, in his grief, created a monster, not through deliberate malice like William Afton did, but through the unintended consequences of his breakdown, his assault on an innocent machine that was only trying to continue the relationship it had been designed to maintain. The Mimic's violence stems from mimicry of violence, a child learning to hit because it saw adults hitting, a machine replicating destruction because destruction was what it observed. This tragic framework, the way the Mimic represents a different kind of horror than Afton's deliberate cruelty, a horror born from grief and unintended consequences and the dangers of creating something that learns without understanding. remains completely invisible to players who skip the books. They see another animatronic enemy, another threat to overcome, missing the emotional weight that comes from knowing this thing was once innocently mimicking a child's laughter, learning games and play before it learned dismemberment and deception. The epilogues across the 8 main tales from the Pizzaplex books build this story methodically, piece by piece, showing the mimic's influence spreading, showing people attempting to contain it or control it or destroy it, showing how it adapts, how it learns from each encounter, how it becomes more sophisticated in its mimicry, developing almost a personality through accumulated behaviors even though it lacks true consciousness. The narrative running through these epilogues is genuinely compelling. A slow build horror story about the persistence of learned trauma, about how violence echoes forward through systems, about the impossibility of truly controlling something designed to learn everything it encounters. And then there's Secret of the Mimic, the upcoming game announced to finally bring the Mimic's backstory into the games themselves. As of January 2026, the game's release is still anticipated, but hasn't occurred yet, leaving a strange liminal period where book readers know the Mimic's story, but the games haven't provided that context to the wider player base. The game is expected to show Edwin's story, David's death, the Mimic's creation and corruption, finally offering game-only players the foundation they've been missing. The explanation for why this entity exists and what drives it. But until that release, and for all the time between the book's publication and the game's announcement, this lore was genuinely lost to a significant portion of the fan base, existing in a form most players never encountered, creating a knowledge gap that manifested in confused forum posts and misunderstandings about security breaches ending, and debates about whether Afton was truly dead or still influencing events. Debates that could have been resolved if everyone had the same information, if the books weren't treated as optional supplementary content, but rather as essential reading for understanding the current direction of the franchise. Sister Location's web of hidden connections. Sister Location arrived in October 2016, as perhaps the most narratively dense entry in the franchise up to that point, trading the static office defense of previous games for a more exploratory structure where you move through different rooms each night, interacting with the fun-time animatronics in ways that felt more personal, more deliberately dangerous, more like you were prey being herded through a slaughterhouse rather than a guard defending against intruders. The game's story unfolded through Baby's guidance, through night-by-night progression toward the scooping room, toward revelation that you were being manipulated, that Baby's help was actually the final stage of a plan to escape the underground facility using your body as a disguise. But Sister Location also contains secrets, numerous secrets, layered into its environments and minigames and hidden interactions in ways that rewarded exploration and experimentation. And many of those secrets flew completely under the radar for casual players who simply wanted to experience the main story and move on. The most significant of these hidden elements involves the private room, a secret location accessible only after completing specific requirements, and within that room, a keypad that accepts a very particular code, unlocking connections to FNAF 4 that many fans never discovered, never understood, fundamentally missing a crucial link in the timeline's chain. Accessing the private room requires substantial effort. First, you need to reach Night 5 and survive Baby's navigation through Funtime Auditorium. That nerve-wracking sequence where Funtime Freddy's and Funtime Foxy's movements are tracked only by sound, where one wrong move means death. After completing the main Night 5 task and returning to the elevator, Instead of simply ascending, you immediately turn right upon exiting Funtime Auditorium, a direction that seems wrong, that feels like it should lead nowhere, and a voice grants access, confirming you found the hidden path. The private room itself appears sparse, utilitarian, featuring a desk, a computer, and that keypad mounted on the wall, numbers 1 through 9 arranged in familiar grid pattern. Most players who reach this room, who put in the effort to discover it, probably experimented with the keypad a bit, trying common codes, birthday dates, number sequences from previous games, hoping to trigger some response. And most of them probably gave up when their guesses yielded nothing. Moving on to explore the other features of the room, or simply leaving satisfied they'd found the secret space, even if they hadn't unlocked all its secrets. But the correct code is 1983. The year FNAF 4's bite occurred. The year the crying child died after his head was crushed in Fredbear's jaws. The year that has appeared as a reference point throughout the series' timeline. Enter those 4 digits into the private room's keypad, and the monitors in the room activate, but they don't show camera feeds from Sister Location's facility. Instead, they display rooms from FNAF 4, the bedroom where you defended against nightmare animatronics, the hallways you checked for threats, the closet where you trapped Nightmare Foxy behind a door, all rendered in the same clean, operational visual style as Sister Location's security cameras, suggesting these aren't just references but actual surveillance feeds, actual connections between locations. This revelation carries massive implications that reshape how we understand FNAF 4's ambiguous setting. Were those nightmare sequences literal nightmares? A child's terror-induced hallucinations while dying in a hospital? Were they a person's guilty dreams, Michael Afton reliving his brother's fears after causing his death? Or were they real, in a sense, actual animatronics designed to terrify, part of William Afton's experiments testing fear responses, monitoring how sustained terror affected subjects locked in a controlled environment? The private room's monitors showing FNAF 4's house as if it were a location that exists, that can be surveilled, that connects to Sister Location's underground facility, provides strong evidence for the third interpretation, suggesting those nightmares had physical form, that Afton built actual nightmare animatronics and subjected people to fear experiments. Whether this specifically included his own sons remains debatable, but the surveillance capability itself is documented fact. The geographic relationship becomes clearer when you examine Sister Location's breaker room map, that maintenance panel where you restore power to different sections of the facility. Among the accessible areas marked on the map, you can spot additional rooms grayed out, inaccessible during gameplay, but clearly present in the facility's layout, and their configurations match FNAF 4's house. The bedroom, the hallways, the connections between spaces, all there in Sister Location's underground complex, either directly beneath or somehow connected to that Afton household where the crying child lived, where Michael tormented his brother, where family tragedy unfolded. This discovery fundamentally alters our understanding of the Afton family dynamics. William wasn't just a businessman who happened to kill children. He was conducting experiments, using his own facility, possibly using his own children as subjects, testing the effects of induced terror, perhaps trying to understand fear's role in his broader plans involving remnant and possession and life beyond death. Michael might have suffered through those nightmare nights, not as dreams but as actual experiences, his father's test subject, his punishment for causing his brother's death, or perhaps just another data point in Afton's cold research, The crying child's constant fear of the animatronics, documented through FNAF 4's minigames, might have originated from exposure to these nightmare versions, actual encounters with deliberately terrifying machines, rather than simple childhood phobia. And the fact that this connection requires players to both find the private room and know to enter specifically 1983 on the keypad means countless players never made this link, never understood that FNAF 4 and Sister Location occupied the same space, that the fear experiments weren't speculation, but confirmed by direct evidence hidden behind layers of secret access. They played Sister Location for its story, for Baby's deception and the scooping room revelation, and the understanding that you're playing as Michael Afton. And they missed the deeper horror underneath, the implication that Afton's evil extended to human experimentation, to terrorizing people in controlled environments, to treating fear as a commodity to be studied and exploited. Beyond the private room, Sister Location contains other obscure secrets that flew under most radars. Yendo, a mysterious endoskeleton that appears rarely in Funtime Auditorium during nights 3 and 5, looks almost identical to Funtime Freddy's endoskeleton, but features golden eyes instead of Funtime Freddy's blue, and it has a right hand where Funtime Freddy's right arm terminates in the hand puppet Bon Bon. No explanation is offered for Yendo's existence within the main game. It simply appears as an Easter egg, standing there when you look through certain cameras, offering no threat, but radiating wrongness through its unexpected presence. Theories about Yendo's significance range from it being an earlier prototype of Funtime Freddy, to it representing something supernatural, a golden-eyed entity similar to Golden Freddy that manifests within the facility. The lack of concrete answers, the way the game presents Yendo with no context or explanation, makes it genuinely mysterious rather than simply obscure, a character whose purpose remains debatable years after Sister Location's release. Most players never encountered Yendo at all, their camera movements never happening to catch it during its brief random appearances, meaning this mystery remained not just unsolved, but undiscovered for much of the player base. Lolbit presents a similar case of random transformations and unexplained presence. In Sister Location's Funtime Auditorium, Ennard's mask occasionally switches to Lolbit's distinctive design, an orange and white fox character who served as the shopkeeper in a FNAF world, now appearing in Sister Location for no clear narrative reason. The transformation seems to occur randomly, with no known trigger or pattern, just another layer of strangeness in a game already saturated with mechanical and narrative complexity. Again, most players would miss this entirely, never happening to glance at Ennard's mask during the brief moments when it displays Lolbit's face, never knowing this connection to FNAF world existed. Mini-arenas, the small ballerina animatronics associated with Ballora, appear in the strangest places as secret Easter eggs throughout Sister Location. You might spot one standing next to your television screen in the living room cutscenes between nights, a tiny figure that shouldn't be there, that serves no purpose except to unsettle, to remind you that the facility's animatronics can infiltrate even your supposedly safe spaces. During Plushtrap's minigame in the extras menu, a mini-arena might appear in one of the doors, watching, waiting, again offering no threat, but making its presence known in a way that feels wrong. These appearances suggest the mini-arenas possess mobility and autonomy beyond what the main gameplay demonstrates, that they can move through the facility freely, observe from shadows, exist in spaces where they shouldn't logically fit. It transforms them from simple secondary enemies into something more insidious, more pervasive, more capable of infiltration than their small size and seemingly harmless appearance would suggest. But encountering these hidden mini-arenas required either extreme luck or knowledge that they existed and where to look for them, meaning most players experienced sister location without ever realizing the mini-arenas were watching from unexpected corners. The Ballora Gallery blue screen Easter egg, accessed by holding 0 and 1 for roughly 83 seconds, then pressing 1, displays technical readouts and constantly changing values, offering a glimpse behind sister location's mechanical curtain. We touched on this earlier in the context of numerical secrets, but its existence within sister location's ecosystem of hidden content deserves emphasis because it represents Scott's willingness to include secrets that serve no narrative purpose, that reward curiosity for its own sake, that exist simply because they can, because hiding them is fun, because creating layers of discovery keeps players engaged long after the main story concludes. All these secrets, from the private room's FNAF 4 connection to Yendo's golden eyes to Lolbit's random appearances to hidden mini-arenas to the Ballora Gallery technical readouts, create a web of hidden content that most players never fully explored, never completely uncovered. Experiencing sister location as a linear narrative about infiltration and scooping, and Michael Afton's sacrifice, rather than as a puzzle box filled with Easter eggs that required specific knowledge or behaviors to access. The game contained multiple layers of experience, from the surface story to the hidden private room, to the rarest random encounters, and only players willing to dig, experiment, and pursue every possible secret would see its full scope. Shadow entities and rare encounters. Among FNAF's many mysteries, few prove as persistently elusive as the shadow animatronics, those dark, glitching figures that appear with such astronomical rarity that encountering them feels less like gameplay and more like witnessing something that shouldn't exist, something that slipped through cracks in reality's fabric. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, formerly designated in the game files as RCHADWQFSSFASEXE, a designation that itself invites endless speculation about pronunciation and meaning, exist in FNAF 2 as Easter eggs so uncommon that players could complete hundreds of nights without ever seeing them, making these entities legendary within the community, spoken about in hushed tones, debated regarding their very existence, until enough players captured screenshots and videos to confirm they were real, coded into the game, waiting in the digital shadows for the rare moments when probability aligned in their favor. Shadow Freddy appears in the parts and service room, but only under specific circumstances that require both extreme luck and specific game states to align. All the withered animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, must have already left parts and service, creating an empty space where this dark duplicate can manifest, and even then, the appearance carries only a 1 in 100 chance of triggering. Those are steep odds in a game where each night lasts approximately 6 to 7 minutes in real time, meaning you might spend hours, days, weeks playing FNAF 2 without ever seeing Shadow Freddy materialize, without ever knowing this secret existed unless someone told you, or you stumbled across community discussions documenting its existence. When Shadow Freddy does appear, he doesn't attack, doesn't move, doesn't follow any behavioral patterns that would make him a threat requiring management. He simply exists, standing there in parts and service, a purple-tinged silhouette of Freddy Fazbear with white eyes that stare vacantly forward. His presence inexplicable, his purpose unclear. look at him through the camera, and he persists for a few moments before vanishing, leaving you to question whether you actually saw him or if the game glitched, if stress and exhaustion from defending against the actual threats made you hallucinate something that wasn't there. He's not scary in the traditional jump scare sense. He's unsettling in a deeper way, in the way unexplained phenomena are unsettling, things that shouldn't be possible but clearly are. Shadow Bonnie, that entity with the unpronounceable designation, appears with even more restrictive requirements, manifesting in your office randomly but so infrequently that the odds feel even lower than Shadow Freddy's 1 in 100, though exact probabilities for Shadow Bonnie remain somewhat unclear in community analyses. Unlike Shadow Freddy's static presence in a camera, Shadow Bonnie appears directly in your space, in your office, a dark silhouette of Toy Bonnie with glowing white eyes, crouched in the corner or standing against the wall. And when he appears, you can interact with him by double-clicking, which triggers a distorted glitching screen, followed by Shadow Bonnie's disappearance and your survival, making him one of the few entities in FNAF 2 whose appearance doesn't necessarily mean death if you respond correctly. The lore implications of these shadow entities have been debated extensively, with no definitive answers emerging from the games themselves. One prevalent theory proposes they represent the spirits of employees who died in Springlock failures, their deaths so traumatic, so agonizing, that they left dark impressions in the pizzeria's fabric, shadows cast by suffering that linger in the space where metal and flesh crush together. This interpretation draws support from Phone Guy's training tapes in FNAF 3, which mention multiple Springlock failures at a sister location, incidents severe enough to cause the temporary retirement of all Springlock suits. The timing and nature of these failures could potentially create the kind of spiritual residue that might manifest as shadow forms, though the connection remains speculative rather than confirmed. An alternative interpretation suggests the shadows represent fragments of agony, concentrated remnant created through extreme negative emotions, taking semi-autonomous form without being fully conscious entities, more like echoes or recordings than actual ghosts. This reading aligns with the concept of dark remnant introduced in later materials. The idea that suffering can crystallize into a semi-physical substance that persists and influences its environment, creating phenomena that resemble hauntings but operate on different principles than traditional possession. Shadow Freddy appears again in FNAF 3, playing a crucial role in luring the original animatronics to Purple Guy during the dismantling sequence, though the sprite is often called Shadow Freddy by the community, while officially appearing purple in the minigames. This figure leads the possessed animatronics through the Follow Me sequence until each reaches the back room where Afton destroys them. Whether this represents the same Shadow Freddy entity from FNAF 2, or simply William Afton himself luring the animatronics, or something else entirely wearing a familiar form, remains open to interpretation. The ambiguity suggests shadows in FNAF's world might be more versatile than simple hauntings, potentially serving as tools or disguises in larger schemes. The lack of definitive answers, the way these shadow entities appear without explanation and serve no clear mechanical purpose beyond being rare encounters, makes them feel genuinely mysterious rather than simply obscure. They're not puzzle pieces waiting to be fitted into a larger picture. They're fragments that might not connect to anything, anomalies that exist for their own sake, reminders that not everything in FNAF's world follows logical patterns, that some phenomena resist explanation even as they persist in manifesting. Nightmare Endoskeleton, appearing in FNAF VR Help Wanted, continues this tradition of extremely rare encounters that most players never experience. In the Enard vent repair segment, if you look down through the grill you're standing on, you might catch a glimpse of this entity, a bare metallic skeleton with oversized claws and teeth that represents the underlying structure of the nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4. Flash your light at it, and it disappears immediately, refusing to be examined, maintaining its mystery through evasion. The encounter lasts mere seconds, if it occurs at all, and many players completing the vent repair section multiple times never see it, never know this nightmare lurks beneath their feet during that already tense segment. The fact that Help Wanted eventually added a gallery mode where you can view Nightmare Endoskeleton's model more carefully, rotating it. Examining its construction somewhat reduces the mystique, transforming it from pure mystery into observable object. But during the game's initial release, before that gallery unlock, Nightmare Endoskeleton existed as pure Easter egg, an entity glimpsed and gone, confirming that Nightmare animatronics had actual endoskeletons, rather than being purely hallucinatory, adding weight to the theory that FNAF 4's nightmares were physical tests rather than dreams. These rare shadow entities and hidden endoskeletons serve a specific function in FNAF's design philosophy. They reward obsessive play, they encourage community sharing of discoveries, and they maintain a sense that the games contain depths most players will never fully plumb. The statistical rarity ensures that encountering them feels special, feels like a privilege, like the game selected you specifically for this glimpse behind the curtain. And because so few players see them through natural play, their existence remains lost lore for much of the fanbase, known only through videos and wiki articles and community discussions rather than direct experience. The shadows also represent Scott's understanding that horror benefits from the unexplained, that not every mysterious element needs a clear answer, that sometimes the most effective scares are the ones that resist interpretation, that simply exist as wrongness in the world, without clear purpose or origin. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie don't need elaborate backstories. Their presence alone, rare and glitching and impossible to explain through the game's established mechanics, creates unease more effectively than a detailed explanation ever could. Security Breach's Overlooked Narratives Security Breach, released in December 2021, represented FNAF's boldest departure from established formula, transforming the franchise from static defense and limited exploration into full three-dimensional open-world navigation through the sprawling Pizzaplex. With its themed areas and towering scale and technological advancement that made previous locations feel like quaint relics. The game's ambitious scope came with numerous technical issues at launch, glitches and bugs that sometimes broke immersion, sometimes created unintended shortcuts, sometimes frustrated players trying to follow the intended path through its massive environment. But buried within that problematic, glitchy exterior existed secrets, references, and hidden narratives that most players missed entirely. Lost amid the chaos of escaping glam rock animatronics and navigating through maintenance tunnels, one of the most poignant hidden details appears in the sewers beneath the Pizzaplex, that flooded network of tunnels you traverse during certain routes through the game, avoiding Chica's patrol patterns and Vanny's pursuit while trying to reach the next objective. In a side area easily overlooked during the stress of evasion, you can discover a tableau, a carefully arranged scene featuring several staff bots, those faceless worker animatronics that maintain the Pizzaplex, positioned around a table in a domestic configuration that immediately signals meaning for anyone familiar with FNAF's lore. The bots are arranged to represent the Afton family. One server bot sits at the table's head, representing William Afton, the patriarch, the killer, the presence that dominated his family through manipulation and cruelty. An attendant bot likely represents Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, who died when Circa's baby's stomach claw pulled her inside during a moment of tragic curiosity. A headless bot represents the crying child, William's youngest son, who died when Fredbear's jaws closed on his skull, decapitated here in symbolic representation of that crushing bite. A magician bot, with its trickster implications and showman aesthetics, represents William again, or perhaps his dual nature, the way he presented as family man and businessman, while secretly being a child killer. And a nanny bot might represent Mrs. Afton, the mother who remains almost completely absent from the games, despite being referenced in the novels, her lack of presence in the lore symbolized by the bot's generic, undefined role. This scene serves no mechanical purpose. It doesn't unlock anything, doesn't trigger dialogue, doesn't advance any of Security Breach's multiple ending paths. It simply exists for players who look carefully, who take time during a sequence designed to create panic and urgency, who notice this strange domestic arrangement in the sewers and pause to consider what it might mean, for players rushing through, focused solely on reaching the next objective, on escaping Chica's pursuit, on progressing the story. This tableau remains completely invisible, lost in the environment's visual noise. The fact that it appears in the sewers, in the literal underground of the Pizzaplex, feels appropriate for a representation of the Afton family. This dynasty of tragedy and murder that serves as the foundation everything in the modern location is built upon, buried beneath the bright lights and cheerful music, hidden in dark water and maintenance tunnels. The Pizzaplex was constructed directly atop the ruins of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the location where Henry Emily's trap fire consumed William and the possessed animatronics, attempting to end the cycle of haunting and murder. That the Afton family's symbolic representation appears in the depths, in the ruins beneath the new construction, emphasizes how the past persists, how tragedy leaves marks that can't be paved over, how the sins of parents shape environments long after the parents themselves are gone. Another overlooked element appears in the arcade. That vast collection of games scattered throughout the Pizzaplex, particularly the repeated appearance of one specific name dominating the high score boards, GGY. This three-letter designation appears across multiple arcade cabinets, always in the top position, always suggesting someone with either extraordinary skill or unusual access to the arcade systems has been playing extensively, leaving their mark on every game they encounter. For players casually noting the scoreboards, GGY might seem like random filler, generic video game initials without significance. But GGY connects to tales from the Pizzaplex literature, specifically a story titled simply GGY. In that story, the initials belong to a character heavily implied to be connected to Gregory, Security Breach's child protagonist, though the exact relationship between story and game remains somewhat ambiguous. The tale suggests disturbing possibilities about past events involving control or influence by Glitchtrap or the Mimic, raising questions about whether Gregory's role in Security Breach's events might be more complicated than the game initially presents. This creates another instance where book knowledge dramatically alters how you interpret game content, where something seemingly innocuous, simple high-score initials carries weight and meaning that game-only players cannot access, remaining forever lost to them unless they venture into the supplementary literature. The GGY mystery extends into questions about Gregory's true nature, whether he's simply a homeless child who happened to be in the Pizzaplex at closing, as the game suggests, or whether he has deeper connections to the location, to Vanny's plans, to the Mimic's influence. Some theories within the community propose Gregory might not be entirely human, drawing parallels to the revelation about Charlie in the novels and suggesting he could be another robot constructed to serve a purpose we don't yet fully understand. These theories draw support from small details that could be interpreted as unusual. Gregory's capabilities surviving against threats, his apparent knowledge of the Pizzaplex's systems, his resourcefulness that seems remarkable for a child. However, these observations could just as easily represent typical video game protagonist competence rather than evidence of his artificial nature. The theories remain speculative, built on implications and parallels rather than concrete confirmations. Another layer of potential lore that might be significant, or might be the community reading deeper meaning into ambiguous details. The daycare contains a secret room that requires specific steps to access, starting with obtaining the FazCam, a collectible tool used for scanning hidden objects throughout the Pizzaplex. With the camera acquired, you need to navigate to the daycare balcony, find the specific wall panel that appears slightly different from its neighbors, scan it with the FazCam to reveal a hidden door, then solve the puzzle inside to gain entry to a room decorated with children's drawings, sticky notes, and environmental storytelling that suggests this was a space used by Vanny or someone working with Vanny, a hideout within the Pizzaplex, where plans were made, where the line between employee and follower of Glitchtrap became blurred. The room's contents include references to past events, drawings that might depict the Afton children, notes that suggest psychological manipulation, details that reward players who take time to read and analyze rather than simply scanning for the next objective marker. But reaching this room requires knowing it exists, knowing the FazCam can reveal hidden doors, knowing where to look in the vast daycare area, a series of knowledge requirements that meant most players never discovered it, never saw the evidence it contained, missing another piece of Security Breach's fragmented narrative puzzle. The wallpaper code puzzle, referenced in the Dorco cartoon promotional material that helped decrypt it, appears in this secret room as strange patterns that seem decorative until you realize they encode information. They're telling you something if you can translate their language. The community eventually cracked this code through collaborative effort, combining clues from the cartoon with careful examination of the wallpaper's repeating elements, uncovering messages about Vanny's activities and the Pizzaplex's darker purposes. But solving this required knowledge extending beyond the game itself, required engagement with promotional material, required the kind of cross-media investigation that casual players would never undertake, ensuring the wallpaper's secrets remained lost to all but the most dedicated theorists. Security Breach also contains a reference to Chuck E. Cheese conspiracy theories, that pervasive internet rumor about the restaurant chain reusing pizza slices, cutting partial pies into new arrangements to save money and reduce waste. In the Pizzaplex, you can find pizza that demonstrates this same mismatched slice pattern. Pieces that don't align properly, that came from different pizzas combined into one. A small nod to that conspiracy that serves no purpose, except to amuse players familiar with the reference. It's the kind of detail that requires specific cultural knowledge, awareness of pizza restaurant conspiracies that circulate in weird internet corners, making it invisible to anyone not versed in that particular strand of conspiracy lore. These overlooked narratives, from the Afton family bot tableau, to the GGY high scores, to the secret daycare room, to the wallpaper code, to the Chuck E. Cheese pizza reference, demonstrate how security breach hid its lore in environmental details, in optional areas, in connections to external media, creating a game where the main path offered a straightforward escape story, while the full experience, the complete lore, remained buried in places most players never looked, hidden behind knowledge gates and exploration requirements and cross-media engagement that ensured much of Security Breach's narrative depth would remain lost to casual players who simply wanted to help Gregory escape the Pizzaplex and see the credits roll. Ultimate Custom Night's true nature. Ultimate Custom Night presented itself as a celebration of FNAF's history, a final night where every enemy from every game could attack simultaneously, where you could customize the difficulty of each animatronic individually, creating personalized challenges ranging from simple to nearly impossible, depending on how sadistically you configured the roster. On that surface level, it functioned as exactly what it advertised. A custom night mode expanded to absurd proportions, a playground for skilled players to test themselves against overwhelming odds, to prove mastery over mechanics they'd spent years learning across multiple games. And for many players, that's all Ultimate Custom Night ever was: a challenging mode to conquer, a skill check to pass, an achievement to unlock and screenshot. But Scott Cawthon embedded a narrative into Ultimate Custom Night's framework, turning it into not just a gameplay challenge, but a statement about William Afton's fate, about the nature of punishment and persistence in FNAF's world, about what happens when spirits refuse to grant rest, when vengeance supersedes peace, when one soul's anger creates a dimension designed purely for torment. This transformation from challenge mode to cosmic punishment reveals itself through voice lines, through the way animatronics address you directly, speaking not to a random player, but to Afton himself, reminding him of his crimes, taunting him with his failure, promising this torture will continue forever. The vengeful spirit, the entity orchestrating this nightmare, makes their presence known through various means, most notably as Golden Freddy, that slumped, ethereal figure whose appearances feel more supernatural than mechanical. When Golden Freddy manifests with the ability to speak, calling Afton out directly, referencing his inability to escape. The game stops being about defending an office and starts being about experiencing hell from the inside, understanding that every death, every jump scare, every failure to survive the night isn't an actual end, but just another iteration, another cycle beginning immediately when the last one concludes, an eternal loop with no exit, no victory condition, no way to make it stop. Identifying the vengeful spirit becomes complicated by evidence from different sources pointing to different conclusions. In the games themselves, particularly through Ultimate Custom, Night's interactions, and Golden Freddy's prominent role, evidence points toward Cassidy, the fifth missing child, whose name appears in the survival logbook through complex puzzle solving, whose spirit seems most directly connected to Golden Freddy across multiple games. The theory that Cassidy refuses to move on gains support from interpretations of Happiest Day, where the fifth child appears to stand alone after the others receive their closure, potentially suggesting a deeper anger, a more personal vendetta than the other victims harbored. But the Fazbear Frights books introduce Andrew, a young boy who dies at Afton's hands and becomes the primary spirit tormenting him in parallel stories that mirror Ultimate Custom Night scenario. In those tales, Andrew's attachment keeps Afton alive through sheer force of will, refusing to let him die properly, maintaining his suffering as eternal punishment. Andrew wears an alligator mask in the story descriptions, creating visual connections to various alligator-themed elements throughout the franchise, suggesting his potential importance extends beyond just the book continuity. The debate between Cassidy and Andrew as the vengeful spirit becomes another instance where book readers and game-only fans operate with different information, different conclusions about who's punishing Afton and why. Game evidence supports Cassidy, while book parallels support Andrew. And Scott's typical approach of using books to fill in gaps without confirming whether they're direct answers or alternative interpretations leaves both possibilities valid, both communities convinced of their preferred candidate's correctness. Regardless of specific identity, the vengeful spirit's role remains clear. They've constructed Ultimate Custom Night as Afton's personal hell, a dimension where every enemy he created, every person he harmed through his animatronics, manifest to attack him endlessly. The 50 animatronics aren't random threats. They're memories, consequences, manifestations of Afton's lifetime of cruelty given form in his punishment. Each one that kills him represents another victim, another moment of terror he inflicted on others, now turned back on him, an eye for an eye multiplied across decades of murder. The death coin mechanic, that one-use item you can purchase with collected Faz coins to eliminate any single animatronic from the night, takes on darker meaning in this context. It represents Afton's desperate attempts to control his punishment, to reduce the threats facing him, to find some relief from the onslaught. But it's temporary, limited, fundamentally insufficient against the sheer number of enemies, just another way the vengeful spirit toys with hope, offering brief moments of reduced danger before the night continues, before the next animatronic appears, before death comes again and the cycle restarts. Using the death coin on Golden Freddy specifically, after setting up the exact configuration we discussed earlier with only Golden Freddy active and having accumulated enough coins for the purchase, triggers the Fredbear jump scare, that secret encounter that reveals the original, the character whose malfunction started everything. This interaction suggests layers within Afton's punishment, the way even attempting to eliminate the vengeful spirit's vessel results in confronting the deeper trauma, the original sin of the crying child's death, the bite of 83 that arguably set all subsequent tragedies in motion when it destroyed Afton's family, twisted his already troubled mind, pushed him toward the murders that define his legacy. The Old Man Consequences encounter, which we explored earlier in depth, offers philosophical counterpoint to the vengeance driving Ultimate Custom Night's existence. His advice to leave the demon to his demons and rest your own soul speaks directly to the cost of maintaining Afton's punishment, the way the vengeful spirit traps themselves alongside their victim, binding their eternal existence to his suffering, unable to move on because they refuse to let him rest. It's a warning, a suggestion that this punishment, however deserved, harms the one inflicting it as much as the one receiving it. This creates a complex moral space where Afton clearly deserves punishment for his crimes, for the children he murdered, for the suffering he inflicted, for the callous way he treated human life as expendable in pursuit of his experiments and immortality. He earned whatever hell awaits him. But the vengeful spirit's choice to personally maintain that hell, to bind themselves to Afton's existence, to reject peace in favor of eternal revenge, carries its own tragedy. The way good people can be corrupted by their desire for justice, the way victims can become trapped by their own anger, unable to accept closure because closure feels like letting the guilty escape consequences. Ultimate Custom Night's true nature, this dimension of punishment maintained by a child's rage, transforms every death screen from simple failure state into narrative statement. Each time an animatronic kills you, each time the screen goes dark and the night resets, you're experiencing a moment in Afton's eternal loop. A cycle that will continue long after you stop playing, that exists independent of player engagement in the story space where Afton's spirit endures endless torment. The game becomes performance of punishment, invitation to experience hell from the tormented side, understanding through play what it means to face endless threats with no hope of true escape. And the fact that most casual players simply saw Ultimate Custom Night as a challenge mode, as gameplay without deep narrative significance, means they missed this entire layer of meaning, missed understanding that they were performing William Afton's eternal damnation, that every time they configured the animatronics and attempted another night, they were reenacting one cycle in a loop that has no beginning or end in the narrative space where the vengeful spirit maintains their victim's suffering. The law was there, in voice lines and interactions, and the very structure of infinite replayability. But recognizing it required attention to those voice lines, required theorizing about Ultimate Custom Night's canonical status, required accepting that this wasn't just a greatest hits collection, but a statement about deserved suffering and the cost of revenge. Lost Tales from the Pizzaplex. The scrapped 9th book. When Scholastic announced the Tales from the Pizzaplex series in October 2021, the publishing schedule initially included plans for a 9th book, expected to release in January 2024, according to their trade catalogue. This 9th volume appeared alongside other upcoming FNAF publications in promotional materials, listed with the same matter-of-fact certainty as the books that actually saw release, creating anticipation for another set of 3 stories and another epilogue chapter continuing the Mimic's narrative through the Pizzaplex's shadowed history. Fans who had been following the series since Lally's game in July 2022, who had absorbed each volume's stories and tried to piece together the epilogue's overarching plot, looked forward to this 9th installment as the next piece of a puzzle that seemed to be building towards something significant. But January 2024 came and went with no 9th book, no announcement, no explanation, no official statement about why the expected publication never materialized. The book simply vanished from upcoming release schedules, deleted from promotional materials, never mentioned again in any official capacity, leaving a void where the 9th Tales from the Pizzaplex volume should have existed. The series concluded instead with B72, the 8th book released in October 2023. Its epilogue ending on what fans generally consider a cliffhanger, a resolution that feels incomplete without the additional context that presumably would have appeared in subsequent volumes. The scrapped 9th book represents a particular kind of lost lore, not content that exists but remains hidden, but content that was planned, possibly even written or partially written, but never reached the public, never became part of the accessible canon, leaving fans to wonder what stories it would have contained, what epilogue revelations it might have provided, what answers it could have offered to questions the 8 published books raised without fully resolving. It's lost through absence, mystery through cancellation, a piece of FNAF's expanded universe that exists only as a gap in the publishing schedule, a reminder that not all planned content makes it to release. Speculation about why the 9th book was scrapped ranges from practical publishing decisions to narrative restructuring. The exact reason remains unconfirmed, but several possibilities exist. The tales from the Pizzaplex series face some criticism for occasionally uneven quality, with stories that felt rushed or incomplete, and epilogues that sometimes seem disconnected from their accompanying tales. The rapid production schedule demanded by regular releases may have strained the creative process, potentially leading to a decision that ending the series at 8 books made more sense than continuing to an arbitrary number. Another possibility involves the relationship between the tales from the Pizzaplex continuity and the games. Initially, the books seemed to be direct prequels to Security Breach, filling in backstory about the Pizzaplex's construction, about the Mimic's presence beneath it, about events leading to the game scenario. But as the series progressed and Secret of the Mimic, the upcoming game, was announced, it became clear that Scott intended to bring the Mimic's origin story into the games themselves, potentially making the tales from the Pizzaplex version of events obsolete or contradictory, creating a situation where continuing the book series might complicate rather than clarify the canon timeline. Secret of the Mimic's development, which presumably began while Tales from the Pizzaplex was still being published, may have revealed conflicts between the book continuity and the game continuity Scott wanted to establish, leading to a decision to end the book series early, rather than risk creating contradictions that would frustrate fans trying to assemble a coherent timeline. The game, with its wider audience and more direct player engagement, takes precedence over books, meaning if conflicts arose, the books would need to adjust or conclude to protect the game's narrative integrity. The scrapped 9th book also connects to questions about what the full Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogue sequence was building toward. Because the 8 published books' epilogues tell a story about the Mimic's activities, about people trying to contain it, about its influence spreading through the Pizzaplex's systems, but that story doesn't reach a definitive conclusion, doesn't provide the kind of closure that suggests this is the end of this particular narrative thread. It stops, leaves threads dangling, implies there was more to come that never arrived, making the entire epilogue sequence feel incomplete when read as a whole. Fans who invested in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, who read all 8 books and tried to track the epilogue's progression, found themselves in a frustrating position where the story they'd been following simply ended without warning, without the resolution presumably planned for the 9th book, without answers to questions the earlier epilogues raised. It's a particular kind of narrative disappointment, not bad writing or poor quality, but incomplete storytelling. A tale that stops mid-sentence because the next chapter was cancelled, leaving readers to imagine their own conclusions or wait for future materials that might address these dangling threads, though no such materials have been announced. The bonus story Monster, included in a Walmart-exclusive bind-up of the 2nd and 3rd tales from the Pizzaplex books released in July 2024, offers a small consolation, a new story that wasn't part of the original 8-book run, suggesting some of the content planned for Volume 9 or other scrap stories might eventually see release in alternative formats, compilations, special editions, or other publishing vehicles that don't require a full 9th volume. But Monster is one story, not 3 plus an epilogue, leaving the bulk of whatever would have filled that 9th book still lost, still inaccessible, possibly existing in draft form or outlined somewhere in Scott's files, but unavailable to the public who would eagerly consume it if given the chance. This situation also highlights the complicated nature of FNAF's expanded universe, where novels, interactive books, and anthology series exist alongside the games in relationships that remain deliberately ambiguous. Scott has stated, you don't need to read the books to understand the games. But he's also said the books fill in gaps, answer questions, provide context, creating a middle ground where the books are simultaneously optional and essential, depending on how deeply you want to engage with the lore. The scrapped Ninth Tales from the Pizzaplex book epitomizes this ambiguity, its absence creating a gap that might be significant or might be irrelevant, depending on whether its planned content was crucial to understanding the overall narrative, or merely supplementary details that enhance but aren't necessary for comprehension. For completionists, for fans who want to consume every piece of official FNAF content, for theorists trying to assemble the most comprehensive understanding possible. The scrapped ninth book represents a permanent hole in the collection, a piece they can never acquire, a source they can never cite, a mystery they can never solve, because the answers remain trapped in whatever documents or drafts existed before the book's cancellation. It's frustrating in the way any cancelled content frustrates dedicated fans. The knowledge that something was planned, was possibly created, but will remain forever inaccessible, lost not to obscurity, but to publishing decisions that prioritized other considerations over completion. And it serves as a reminder that FNAF's lore, despite appearing to be a carefully planned interconnected web, sometimes emerges through improvisation, adaptation, and revision, with Scott willing to change direction, cancel planned content, restructure narratives if he decides it serves the franchise better, even if it means leaving gaps in the published record that frustrated fans hoping for complete answers to every question the series raises. The scrapped Ninth Tales from the Pizzaplex book will likely remain lost lore forever, a tantalizing absence, a question mark in the bibliography, a reminder that not all planned stories reach their audience, no matter how eager that audience might be to receive them. Conclusion and reflection. We've wandered through shadows tonight, those obscure corners of Five Nights at Freddy's, where secrets persist despite the franchise's decade-long existence, despite countless hours of community investigation, despite the dedicated theorists who've examined every frame of every minigame and every line of every phone call, searching for meaning in Scott Cawthon's elaborate web of horror and mystery. From Golden Freddy's accidentally achievable spawn rate to the hexadecimal secrets hiding in numerical codes, to Ralph's confirmation as phone guy, to the intricate minigame network building toward Happiest Day, to Old Man Consequence's dimensional fishing pond, to the Mimic's tragic origin, lost in book lore, to sister locations, FNAF 4 connections, to Shadow animatronics' impossibly rare encounters, to security breaches' environmental storytelling, to Ultimate Custom Night's true purpose as punishment to the scrapped Ninth Tales. From the Pizzaplex volume, we've covered ground that most fans never tread, revealed details that remain invisible to casual players, explained connections that transform understanding for those willing to engage with the FNAF's depths. These aren't the headline mysteries everyone debates, like who committed the bite of 87, or whether FNAF 4's gameplay represents nightmares or reality, or what exactly happened to Mrs. Afton. These are the details that slip through cracks, the secrets requiring such specific knowledge or such extreme luck to discover that encountering them organically feels miraculous. The lore that exists primarily in data mining discoveries and wiki articles and videos like this, rather than in most players' direct experiences. They're the reward for obsession, for refusing to accept that you've seen everything, for looking at a franchise that seems to have been thoroughly documented and insisting there must be more. There must be layers beneath the layers beneath the layers. And perhaps that's the real beauty of FNAF's approach to hiding secrets. Scott Cawthon doesn't just create mysteries with clear solutions waiting to be found through normal play. He creates mysteries with solutions so obscure that finding them requires community collaboration, extensive knowledge of the franchise's history, willingness to experiment with unlikely button combinations and number sequences, and sometimes just impossible luck, encountering a 1 in 32,768 event that makes you stop and question whether what you're seeing is real. This approach ensures FNAF remains fresh, remains explorable, remains capable of surprising even veteran fans who thought they'd seen everything, because there's always one more secret waiting in the code, one more reference hiding in a book, one more connection that recontextualizes something you thought you understood. The division between game-only fans and those who engage with the books creates parallel understandings of the narrative, where two groups using the same character names and discussing the same locations might be operating from completely different foundational assumptions about who's doing what and why. It's simultaneously frustrating and fascinating. Frustrating because it makes community discussion challenging when not everyone shares the same knowledge base. Fascinating because it allows FNAF to exist at multiple depths simultaneously, offering surface-level horror that satisfies casual players, while rewarding deeper investigation with revelations that transform everything. As we move forward, as new games release and new books expand the universe, and Secret of the Mimic finally brings the eponymous entity's backstory into interactive form, these obscure details will likely be joined by new secrets, new hidden elements, new lore that most fans miss on their first or second or 10th playthrough, waiting patiently for someone to notice, to share, to pull into the light where the community can examine it collectively. Because that's what FNAF does. It hides, it teases, it rewards curiosity, it punishes assumptions. It ensures that declaring "I've seen everything" is always premature, always vulnerable to being disproven by someone who looked one level deeper, who tried one more unlikely combination, who read one more book, who refused to accept the surface explanation. The lost lore we've explored tonight represents only a fraction of FNAF's hidden depths, the pieces I could research and verify and explain in a way that hopefully brought them to life, that showed why they matter, why they're worth knowing even if you never encounter them yourself. Countless other secrets likely exist, waiting to be discovered or rediscovered, discussed or debated, accepted or challenged by a community that continues to find new angles on mysteries over a decade old. And that persistence, that refusal of the franchise to be completely solved, to be fully understood, to be reduced to a simple timeline and character roster, is what keeps people returning, keeps theorists theorizing, keeps fans engaged long after most horror game franchises have faded from cultural relevance. So thank you for joining me in this exploration, for spending these hours in the forgotten corners, for caring about the details most people never see, for being the kind of person who hears about a 1 in 32,000 chance encounter and thinks, "I wonder what makes that spawn," rather than dismissing it as irrelevant trivia. The lore exists because people like you exist, because the obsessive dedication of FNAF's community justifies Scott's obsessive dedication to hiding secrets in increasingly obscure places, creating a feedback loop where complexity breeds, investigation breeds more complexity, an endless cycle not of horror but of discovery. Each generation of fans finding what the previous missed, each new game adding layers the old games can retroactively illuminate. If this resonated with you, If you enjoyed this journey through lost lore, consider liking and subscribing to see more deep dives into the overlooked corners of gaming mysteries. And let me know in the comments what obscure FNAF detail you found most surprising tonight. What revelation changed how you understood the franchise? What secret you'd been completely unaware of despite years of engagement with the games? The conversation continues in the comments, in forums, in Discord servers, in the collective mind of a community that refuses to let mysteries rest unsolved, that treats every game as a puzzle box demanding to be opened, that finds joy in the search as much as in the answers. Until next time, sleep well, dream of animatronic mysteries, and remember that in FNAF, the deepest secrets are always the ones you haven't found yet, waiting in the shadows, in the code, in the spaces between what's obvious and what's true, patient and persistent and ready to reward those curious enough to keep looking even when everything seems already known. The lost lore stays lost only until someone finds it, brings it to light, shares it with the world, transforming obscurity into knowledge, mystery into understanding, one secret at a time.